In today's video, we examine when being rude costs these Karens lives. From a Karen who forces her way into an occupied revolving door, to a Karen's altercation at a public chess table that escalates far beyond anything anyone saw coming. It was November 8th, 2016, in Stamford, Connecticut. The morning air was cool and overcast, with temperatures hovering around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Light foot traffic moved steadily through the commercial district as office workers arrived for the day. The building lobby featured polished tile flooring and a revolving door system at the main entrance. Fixed laminated safety glass panels flanked the doorway, secured within aluminum framing designed to hold the glass in place, even if fractured. Vanna Glint, 40, worked in property management coordination, overseeing tenant relations, inspections, and lease documentation across multiple buildings. She was scheduled to attend a morning walkthrough at 8:30 a.m. and had already expressed frustration about running behind after a delayed conference call. Colleagues described her as someone who prioritized efficiency and frequently complained about slow foot traffic interfering with her schedule. That morning, two individuals were already inside the revolving door compartment, rotating slowly as they maneuvered bags and briefcases through the exit. Vanna approached at a brisk pace. Without waiting for the compartment to clear, she placed both hands against the glass wing and pushed forward despite the occupied space. The internal braking system resisted the forced acceleration, limiting movement until the occupants cleared. She leaned her weight into the panel. The mechanism stalled under opposing force. Her right hand compressed briefly between the moving glass wing and the vertical frame. She jerked backward to free herself. The abrupt shift in momentum destabilized her footing on the polished tile. Her heel slid laterally, and her balance shifted sharply to the side. She fell toward the adjacent fixed sidelight panel. Her shoulder struck the laminated glass with substantial force. The panel fractured instantly, spiderweb cracks radiating from the impact point. The aluminum mullion flexed under the load. The lower anchor channel partially separated from its fasteners, allowing the fractured panel to bow inward beyond normal tolerance. The glass remained largely intact due to its interlayer, but the displacement exposed a rigid, jagged laminated edge where the panel had pulled free. As her upper body continued forward, her neck made direct contact with the exposed edge. The displaced laminated glass and deformed aluminum framing created a fixed cutting surface. The impact produced a deep lateral laceration along the left side of her neck. Witnesses described an immediate spray of blood against the tile and revolving door panel. She collapsed through the compromised opening, landing partially inside the lobby and partially within the vestibule threshold. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her head and shoulders, spreading across the tile. A nearby office worker pressed his jacket firmly against her neck in an attempt to stem the bleeding, while another bystander called emergency services. Vanna remained conscious for less than a minute. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. The bleeding was forceful and rhythmic, consistent with major vascular involvement. Her skin grew pale as blood volume dropped rapidly. Within moments, her movements weakened and she lost consciousness before paramedics arrived. Emergency responders reached the scene within 8 minutes. They applied pressure dressings, initiated advanced life support, and documented significant blood loss. She was transported to a hospital less than 2 miles away. Despite emergency surgical intervention, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The official cause of death was exsanguination due to a deep neck laceration involving major vascular structures, resulting in hypovolemic shock. Building management secured the entrance and cordoned off the area. Police documented the fractured panel and collected witness statements. Inspectors later confirmed that the laminated safety glass and framing system met applicable codes and had been properly installed. The structural failure occurred when forceful lateral impact displaced the lower anchor channel and deformed the mullion beyond design limits, not due to a pre-existing defect. No criminal charges were filed. The incident was ruled accidental. The damaged glazing system was replaced within 48 hours, and additional signage was installed reminding occupants to allow the revolving door compartment to clear before applying forward pressure. It was June 3rd, 2017. The morning crowd moved steadily through a large warehouse-style retail store in Georgia. Flatbed carts rattled across polished concrete while employees restocked tall pallets ahead of the weekend rush. Near the returns counter, a line of customers waited with damaged appliances, clothing exchanges, and routine refund requests. Brenda Schultz was 57 and lived about 10 minutes from the warehouse store with her husband Roy, a long-haul truck driver who spent most weeks on the road. She worked part-time as a church secretary, organizing bulletins, schedules, and attendance records. Members of the congregation knew her for correcting small mistakes immediately: wrong dates, wrong hymn numbers, even minor formatting errors. That same attention to detail carried into her shopping habits. Brenda kept receipts in labeled envelopes and believed stores should stand behind every item they sold. Over several years, she filed numerous return requests at the same warehouse location, sometimes bringing items back months after purchase. Staff at the membership desk recognized her name when it appeared on the screen. On this particular morning, she arrived with another dispute. Brenda entered the store pulling a flatbed warehouse cart. Resting on the platform was a large cardboard box containing a portable gasoline generator weighing roughly 68 pounds. She had purchased it more than 2 years earlier and now claimed it had never worked properly. At the returns counter, a supervisor removed the generator from the box and tested it outside the entrance bay. It started normally. When he returned, he explained that power equipment carried a 90-day return policy and that the purchase was far beyond that window. Brenda immediately raised her voice. Witnesses later said she pointed at the receipt and tapped the counter repeatedly while insisting the store should still accept the return. The supervisor repeated the policy and offered to call a manager to review the situation. Brenda refused. She said she would speak to someone in the hardware section herself. Still visibly irritated, she grabbed the handle of the flatbed cart and pulled it away from the counter. Instead of pushing the cart in front of her, she dragged it behind her through the warehouse aisles. The generator box remained unsecured on the smooth metal platform. Brenda walked quickly through the seasonal garden section, pulling the cart one-handed while weaving around other shoppers. Employees nearby later said she continued speaking loudly about the return policy as she moved through the store. At about 10:44 a.m., she approached a pallet stacked with large bags of mulch that narrowed the aisle. Without stopping, Brenda pivoted sharply to the left to move around it while still pulling the cart behind her. The sudden turn caused the cart to swing outward behind her. As the wheels shifted sideways, the heavy generator box slid across the smooth metal platform toward the edge. The box tipped over the edge and dropped off the cart. One corner struck Brenda's lower leg just above the ankle. The impact knocked her off balance, and she fell sideways onto the concrete floor as the generator box landed beside her. A nearby employee saw the fall and ran toward her while calling for assistance over a handheld radio. Brenda was conscious and shouting in pain, gripping the cart handle while trying to pull herself upright. The employee told her to stay down until help arrived. Brenda attempted to stand anyway. As she shifted her weight, her injured leg collapsed beneath her. She lost balance and fell again, this time striking the side of her head against the concrete floor. After the second fall, she stopped speaking and remained motionless. Employees cleared the aisle while another worker called emergency services. Within minutes, store staff reported that Brenda was breathing but unresponsive. Paramedics arrived shortly afterward and began treatment at the scene before transporting her to a nearby hospital. CT scans revealed a severe traumatic brain injury, including a large subdural hematoma caused by the second impact with the floor. Despite emergency surgery, pressure inside her skull continued to rise as bleeding spread across the surface of the brain. Brenda Schultz was pronounced dead later that evening. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma to the head sustained during the fall. Security footage confirmed the generator had slid from the cart before the initial impact, and that the fatal injury occurred when Brenda struck her head during the second collapse. Store management later reviewed cart handling policies and reminded staff to secure heavy items on flatbed carts to prevent similar incidents. It was the afternoon of March 14, 2016, in Flagstaff, Arizona. A small ceramics and pottery studio tucked along a quiet commercial strip was running its usual weekday class, the kind of place that smelled like wet clay and wood polish. It was the kind of place where people came to slow down, which made what happened that afternoon all the more avoidable. Nadine Feller, 47, worked as a property manager on the north side of Flagstaff, handling a small group of rental units and coordinating repairs for owners who relied on her judgment. Over time, that authority kind of followed her everywhere. She walked into any space like it was partly her responsibility. If something felt off to her, she'd say something. Sometimes she'd just step in and fix it herself. She signed up for a beginner pottery class 3 weeks earlier after her doctor suggested finding a low-stress hobby. Since then, she'd already complained about the class schedule, mentioned the room temperature more than once, and questioned the type of clay being used. She wasn't really there to learn ceramics. It was more about being comfortable and feeling in control. By week 3, people had started to notice and quietly adjusted around her. That afternoon, a kiln was running in the back workroom. An older electric model, sturdy and a bit dated. The instructor had started it before class, and a low hum carried into the studio. Most people tuned it out pretty quickly, but Nadine, not really. About 20 minutes into class, she spoke up, loud enough that everyone heard. The instructor explained the kiln was in the middle of a firing cycle and couldn't be stopped without ruining the pieces inside or damaging the kiln. Fair enough, right? She let it go for maybe 15 minutes. Then she brought it up again, more firmly this time. She said the noise was giving her a headache and asked why she had to sit through it. The instructor gave the same answer and went back to helping another student. Nadine stayed at her station, hands on her clay, clearly not okay with it. Not the kind of quiet where you move on, the kind where you're thinking, so what now? The kiln kept humming. Her irritation didn't go anywhere, and eventually those two things turned into a decision that made perfect sense to her, and none at all to anyone else. While the instructor was occupied with 2 students at the front of the studio, Nadine pushed back her chair and walked down the hallway to the back workroom. She located the power cable along the base of the kiln and unplugged it from the wall outlet. The hum stopped immediately. She stood there for a moment in the sudden quiet, apparently satisfied. Then she reached for the latch on the kiln door and pulled it open. The heat that pours from a kiln running at approximately 1,900 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't announce itself. Nadine caught the full force of it the moment the door swung open. Face, throat, lungs, before she could step back. A student in the hallway saw her stagger and collapse against the wall. The instructor arrived within moments to find her conscious but struggling to breathe, with visible burns around her nose and mouth. Emergency responders transported her to a nearby medical facility. She was alert on arrival, though her voice had already gone rough and thin. The burns to her airway were extensive, and swelling set in over the following hours. Despite the efforts of the medical team, her condition declined steadily through the night. Nadine Feller was pronounced dead in the early hours of the following morning. In the weeks that followed, local authorities reviewed the incident. Witness accounts from the student in the hallway and the others in the main room were consistent throughout. The kiln had been operating normally, and the studio had followed every reasonable procedure. The decision to unplug the unit and open the door had been made entirely by Nadine, without prompting from anyone. The case was ruled an accidental death and closed without further action. The instructor was cleared. Witness accounts confirmed no one had directed Nadine toward the back room. The studio reopened the following month, and the kiln was returned to use without issue. It was October 21st, 2021, in Bellevue, Washington. A strong storm had settled over the area that afternoon. Rain fell steadily across a shopping center parking lot, and water had begun collecting around the electric vehicle charging stations near the entrance. Among the drivers that day was 48-year-old Audrey Gibbons. She worked in sales and was known for being confrontational whenever she felt she had been treated unfairly. Friends said she rarely let disputes go, often challenging people over customer service issues, parking spaces, or public rules. That afternoon, she arrived at the shopping center to charge her luxury electric vehicle while she visited a few stores. The charging area was busy, with nearly every station occupied. Audrey plugged in her vehicle and headed inside. While she was shopping, a problem developed at her charger. Earlier that week, a vehicle had damaged one of the charging units, cracking part of the connector assembly and compromising a protective seal. The charger had been taken out of service and disabled, but investigators later found that stormwater had entered the damaged housing. Combined with an internal electrical fault, parts of the connector remained energized despite multiple safety systems. As the storm intensified, a fault occurred, and Audrey's charging session automatically stopped. When she returned and discovered her vehicle was no longer charging, she immediately became frustrated. Employees explained that the charger had experienced a fault. Nearby drivers pointed to error messages displayed on the station. Audrey wasn't convinced. Instead, she became certain that someone nearby had unplugged her vehicle. As more people attempted to explain what had happened, Audrey became increasingly argumentative. She accused several drivers of interfering with her charging session. "I've met people like Audrey before. Once they're convinced they've been wronged, every explanation sounds like an excuse to them." The rain continued falling as the disagreement dragged on. Rather than accepting the explanation, Audrey decided she was going to get even. She moves from charging station to charging station, unplugging charging cables from other vehicles. Several drivers confronted her, while others recorded the incident. Employees repeatedly told her to stop. She ignored them. Eventually, Audrey walked toward the charger that had already been removed from service. The connector housing showed visible damage, and rainwater had pooled around the pavement near the base of the unit. Audrey continued arguing as she grabbed the damaged charging handle. The hardest thing to process is how many chances she had to walk away. But sometimes proving a point becomes more important than listening. Audrey appeared determined to prove that the equipment wasn't actually damaged. She grabbed the cracked connector and forcefully pulled on it. What happened next unfolded almost instantly. Several people reported seeing a bright flash. Others heard a sharp electrical pop through the sound of the rain. The damaged components shifted under the force. An electrical arc occurred inside the compromised connector. The current traveled through the charging handle and into Audrey's body. She suddenly became rigid before collapsing backward. People nearby immediately rushed toward her, while others called emergency services. Several bystanders began CPR as they waited for paramedics to arrive. Emergency crews continued resuscitation efforts before transporting Audrey to a nearby trauma center. Despite those efforts, she could not be saved. Investigators later determined that moisture had entered the damaged connector. When Audrey forcefully moved the handle, weakened components shifted and triggered an electrical arc inside the connector, resulting in the fatal electrical exposure. Sometimes the real danger isn't what we're focused on. Audrey spent so much energy looking for someone to blame that she overlooked the damaged equipment right in front of her. In the end, investigators found no evidence that anyone had tampered with her vehicle. The charger had simply failed. Audrey's death was officially ruled an accidental electrocution caused by contact with damaged charging equipment during the storm. It was November 2nd, 2013, in Louisville, Kentucky. Cold rain had been falling since midday, and guests entered the funeral home carrying umbrellas and damp coats. Inside, two grieving families shared the building, one for a visitation and one for a service, while staff hurried through the crowded, flower-lined hall. Enter Caroline Keene. She was 58, and to put it mildly, she was a control freak. For 26 years, Caroline worked as a medical billing clerk, turning medical emergencies into neat paperwork. At home, she was the family fixer, handling everyone's debts, rehab stints, and custody drama. Because of that, she was incredibly useful, but honestly, pretty exhausting to be around. When her mother passed away, Caroline's grief turned into pure resentment. She treated the funeral like just another chore she needed to micromanage, but when she arrived, her mother's chapel wasn't ready. The family before them was running late, and the staff needed just 10 minutes to clean up and reset the chairs. 10 minutes! Most of us would grab a coffee or sit down. Not Caroline. She took it as a personal insult. She started pacing the halls, visibly furious. One of the staff members warned her that the floors were slick from everyone tracking in rain, but Caroline brushed it off like it didn't matter. Then, when a woman from the earlier service came out crying, Caroline actually stopped her to complain about how long they were taking. I mean, that's the part that really gets me. You're in a funeral home surrounded by grieving families, and somehow she still made it all about her. Her cousins tried pulling her away, and even the funeral director had to step in and calm her down. Caroline wasn't having it. it. She shoved past him toward the chapel doors. On her way, she clipped a massive, top-heavy, rolling floral stand. Water sloshed everywhere, and the whole thing started to tilt. Staff rushed to grab it, but Caroline was already at the heavy chapel door, ripping at the handle. The door was locked from the inside. Caroline yanked it with everything she had, bracing one foot on the slick floor and leaning her whole body backward to force it open. At that exact second, the massive floral stand tipped completely over. The heavy metal urn smashed into her upper back and shoulder blades, jolting her forward and then sideways off balance. That impact was enough to break her stance. Her shoe slid on the rainwater and crushed flower petals already spread across the tile, and she went down hard. Because she was still gripping the handle, her arm jerked awkwardly as her body dropped, but the real damage came from the fall itself. She pitched backward and slammed the back of her head against the raised marble threshold at the chapel entrance. Witnesses later said the crack echoed through both chapels. The momentum twisted her body as she hit. Her neck and skull took the full force of the fall, and she collapsed flat on the stone floor, bleeding almost immediately. The chapel door swung a few inches on its closer and bumped back toward the frame, but it wasn't what killed her. The fatal injuries came from the head-first impact into the marble edge. Paramedics arrived in 7 minutes, but it was too late. Caroline never woke up. The coroner's report listed catastrophic blunt force head trauma with associated cervical spine fractures. The fall fractured the base of her skull, caused massive bleeding around the brain, and broke bones in her upper neck. Security footage and witnesses confirmed the whole thing. The staff told her to wait. Her family tried to stop her, but her temper got the best of her. No charges were filed. The funeral home did change how they secure those heavy flower stands. As for Caroline's mother, her service actually went on later that day, just as soon as the staff finished cleaning up Caroline's blood from the lobby floor. Talk about a grim twist of fate. It was August 22nd, 2016 in Phoenix, and the afternoon heat was well over 100 degrees, making everyone miserable. Out on I-10, construction barrels squeezed traffic down to a single lane, causing a massive bumper-to-bumper backup. Everyone was stuck, crawling along, completely frustrated and totally on edge. Derek Black was 51, and he used to run his own contracting business. But after a bankruptcy and a divorce, he'd become incredibly bitter. His friends said he was obsessed with the idea that everyone was disrespecting him. He actually made a habit of filming people in traffic and posting the arguments online like he was some kind of internet hero. Personally, I could say he has a main character syndrome and loved cornering people just to make them look bad. That day, he was stuck behind Harold Boone, a 67-year-old retired Army Ranger who used to teach restraint techniques to security guards. Harold was driving an old truck full of irrigation gear. At one point, Harold swerved just an inch over the lane line to avoid a construction barrel. He corrected it right away, but Derek absolutely snapped. He went full Karen mode, aggressively tailgating him, slamming on his horn, and holding his phone up to the window to film Harold while driving like a maniac. As traffic slowed near the construction merge, vehicles were eventually forced off Interstate 10 and onto the frontage road because of lane closures ahead. Cars stacked bumper to bumper approaching the next intersection, where a long red light stopped traffic completely. When traffic finally ground to a halt at a red light on the frontage road, Derek threw a total temper tantrum. He parked his SUV right in the middle of the road, left his door wide open, and marched back to Harold's truck with his phone recording like he was capturing a crime. He started throwing a fit, shouting insults, and literally kicking the side of Harold's truck door. When that didn't get the reaction he wanted, he began violently pounding on the glass, screaming at Harold through the windshield, and then yanked the driver's side door wide open. Witnesses said Harold stayed in his seat and tried to wave him off, telling him to calm down, but Derek wasn't letting it go. He reached into the cab, holding a metal baseball bat he had grabbed from his SUV, and lunged at Harold, screaming threats. Drivers in nearby lanes later said Derek was halfway inside the truck at that point, swinging the bat wildly through the doorway while Harold tried to shield himself against the steering wheel. One witness said the bat struck the dashboard hard enough to crack part of the plastic panel near the gauges. Another driver reported hearing Harold yell after Derek raised the bat again near his head. Fearing for his life with an aggressive stranger violently forcing his way into his truck with a weapon, Harold reached for the handgun he kept in his console and fired once, hitting Derek in the chest. The shot hit Derek high in the upper torso at close range. Witnesses said his body instantly jerked backward from the doorway before he lost his footing on the oily pavement beside the median. Derek stumbled backward out of the doorway, dropping the bat, and collapsed onto the pavement beside the median. The loud pop of the gunshot instantly stopped traffic. Derek was lying there, gasping for air, as drivers jumped out of their cars to help. Several witnesses later described seeing blood rapidly soaking through his shirt, while Harold remained inside the truck, visibly shaken, still holding the handgun pointed downward near his lap. Someone called 911, and paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but the bullet had done too much internal damage. He passed away shortly after arriving. When the police looked at the evidence, including the video on Derek's own phone, it was clear as day. Derek was the aggressor. He had illegally forced his way into Harold's truck and assaulted him with a deadly weapon. Prosecutors didn't file any charges against Harold, ruling the shooting as a clear case of self-defense. When detectives looked into Derek's social media, they found a history of these road rage videos. It was always the same thing, him bullying strangers over minor driving mistakes. It's honestly just sad and chilling. It was June 24, 2018 in Stockton, California. By 3 p.m., temperatures had climbed to 94 degrees and heat shimmered above the residential pavement. Traffic was light along the neighborhood street as an ice cream truck made its afternoon rounds. Zenda Quell, 44, worked at a regional insurance office and was known among colleagues for her insistence on specific procedures and her unwillingness to compromise on matters she deemed unfair. She had a reputation for lengthy complaints about parking violations, service wait times, and perceived slights in customer interactions. That Sunday, she was walking with two children, ages 6 and 8, along a residential block on the eastern side of the city. The children were visiting relatives, and Zenda had offered to take them out for the afternoon. The ice cream truck had stopped near the curb approximately 30 feet ahead. Parents and kids gathered around the service window, forming a loose line. Zenda approached the vendor and began pointing at the truck's position relative to the sidewalk. She insisted the vehicle was parked too close to a driveway entrance and demanded free ice cream cones as compensation for what she described as a safety hazard. The vendor, a man in his mid-30s who had been operating the route for 3 years, declined and explained that the truck was legally parked. Zenda raised her voice. Several parents turned to watch. After a brief exchange lasting roughly 2 minutes, the vendor closed the service window. The truck's engine started, and it began rolling forward at a slow pace down the street. Zenda stepped off the curb and into the roadway. She continued gesturing toward the departing truck, her attention fixed on its rear bumper as it moved away at roughly 8 to 10 miles per hour. She walked around the back of the vehicle and into the opposite lane without looking in either direction. A second ice cream truck was approaching from the other direction at approximately 20 to 25 miles per hour, consistent with residential traffic flow. Witnesses later reported that Zenda never turned her head toward the oncoming vehicle. She was still focused on the first truck when she stepped directly into the path of the second. The driver of the approaching truck saw her and immediately applied the brakes. The tires skidded briefly on the hot asphalt, leaving visible marks that investigators later documented and photographed for their report. The vehicle swerved slightly to the right, but there was insufficient stopping distance to avoid impact. The front bumper struck Zenda at hip level. The impact knocked her onto the hood before she fell back onto the pavement. The truck continued forward a short distance before coming to a complete stop. Bystanders shouted and rushed toward the scene. One person called 911 immediately. The two children stood on the sidewalk, motionless and silent. The driver of the second truck exited the vehicle and stood several feet away, visibly shaken and pale. Several witnesses gathered around but did not move Zenda. She remained on the pavement, unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Paramedics assessed Zenda at the scene and transported her to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The cause of death was listed as traumatic internal injuries, consistent with blunt force trauma sustained in the collision. Investigators reviewed witness statements and examined the roadway. The second driver submitted to testing and showed no signs of alcohol or drug use. No citations were issued. The official report cited pedestrian failure to yield and inattention as contributing factors. The first vendor provided a statement to police but was not implicated. The children were released to relatives later that evening, escorted away from the scene by family members. It was March 14, 2016, at a 3-story apartment complex on the west side of Albuquerque, New Mexico. The building had settled into its usual overnight quiet. A few porch lights glowed along the exterior walkway while most residents had already gone to bed. Directly beneath Unit 3F lived Marlene Koenig, 48. Marlene worked part-time from home as a medical billing coder, reviewing insurance claims on a laptop during late-night shifts. Her schedule rarely matched the rest of the building. She slept through much of the day and stayed awake well past midnight. Most neighbors recognized her not for the job, but for the complaints that often followed. Apartment management records showed she had contacted the city's non-emergency police line more than 90 times over 3 years, usually reporting footsteps, doors closing, or furniture moving in the unit above her ceiling. Property managers kept a thick folder of written complaints she had filed about tenants living upstairs. 5 months earlier, Colton Reyes, 26, a nursing student, had moved into Unit 3F above her. Since then, Marlene had filed 14 separate noise complaints against him. Each time management checked, the activity was described as normal apartment movement, walking across the floor, studying late, or pulling out a chair at a desk. On the night of March 13th, Marlene again called the non-emergency police line, reporting loud pacing above her bedroom. An officer briefly checked the apartment and spoke with Colton Reyes, who had been quietly studying at his kitchen table. Finding nothing unusual, the officer closed the call. Around 1:20 a.m., Marlene called again. Dispatch noted her long history of complaints and advised her to address the issue with property management later. No officer was sent. Frustrated, Marlene left her apartment around 2:10 a.m., wearing a bathrobe and sandals, and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, knocking sharply on Reyes's door. Reyes opened it briefly. According to his statement, Marlene immediately accused him of stomping deliberately to keep her awake. Reyes explained he had been studying and tried to keep quiet. When the argument continued, he closed the door and returned inside. Marlene remained in the hallway, still speaking loudly. Across the walkway beside the stairwell was a wall-mounted fire extinguisher cabinet, painted red and fitted with a glass panel on the front. The cabinet was mounted roughly at chest height and held a standard 5-pound extinguisher secured by a metal bracket. Witnesses later said Marlene walked directly toward the cabinet and began striking the glass panel repeatedly with the heel of her sandal while leaning her weight into the blows and shouting toward Reyes's door. On the 3rd strike, the tempered glass shattered inward, breaking into small fragments that scattered across the concrete walkway. The extinguisher itself remained secured inside the cabinet. Marlene leaned toward the cabinet opening and reached inside toward the extinguisher bracket. As she stepped closer, the sole of her sandal slid across loose glass fragments scattered across the concrete walkway. Her foot shot forward, throwing her body toward the cabinet. When the glass panel shattered, the thin metal frame surrounding the cabinet had bent outward along the lower edge. As Marlene slipped, her abdomen struck the exposed metal corner with full momentum. The exposed metal corner tore through the fabric of her bathrobe and into the left side of her abdomen. The impact stopped her movement instantly. She collapsed onto the walkway, clutching her stomach as blood spread across the concrete. Residents opened their doors after hearing the crash. One neighbor called for help, while Colton Reyes stepped into the hallway and contacted emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Marlene conscious but struggling to breathe with a deep, penetrating abdominal wound. She was transported to a nearby hospital while crews attempted to control the bleeding. Doctors later determined the impact had torn part of her liver and major abdominal vessels, causing rapid internal hemorrhaging. Despite emergency surgery attempts, she died shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental. It was August 14, 2017, at a coastal marina along the Gulf. The docks were calm that afternoon, boats sitting steady, lines tied clean, water barely moving. It looked routine, the kind of setup that only works because everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. Her name was Colleen Kessler, 52, and she had rented a slip for the weekend. She worked in office administration and was known for being controlling about details. Everything had to match her standards or she treated it like a problem. That didn't stay at work. She had a habit of inserting herself into situations that didn't involve her, especially if something looked wrong in her eyes. She didn't ask questions, didn't double-check, didn't wait. She assumed she understood what she was looking at and acted on it. If someone pushed back, she tended to double down rather than reconsider. To her, being confident felt the same as being correct. That weekend, she kept coming back to one specific line tied along the dock a short distance from her slip. It ran from a cleat down into the water, at a tight angle, with no visible boat attached. To anyone familiar with the layout, it was clearly part of a fixed navigation marker system, something placed to guide boats safely out of a shallow section near the marina exit. But she didn't see it that way. What she saw was a mistake, a loose line, something set up poorly, something drifting too close to her space. So she decided to fix it. The first time, she untied it and pulled it over a bit, retightening it where she thought it made more sense. It gave her more room, at least visually. Nothing reacted. No one stopped her. That was enough confirmation for her. Later, she came back and adjusted it again, then again, the next morning. Each change was small, just inches at a time. But that line wasn't meant to be adjusted at all. It was connected to a weighted anchor holding a navigation marker in a precise position underwater. Moving the line changed the marker's placement, and that placement mattered. It marked the safe path between deeper water and a rock shelf that sat just below the surface near the exit. By the time she was ready to leave, the marker had been pulled off its intended line enough to misrepresent the safe route. She untied her own boat and stepped aboard, moving out at a slow, controlled speed. From her perspective, everything looked fine. The water was calm, visibility clear. She lined up her exit based on what she could see, the dock, the spacing, the marker's position. But that marker was no longer where it should have been. As she moved forward, her boat tracked slightly off the safe channel and toward the shallow rock shelf. There was no warning, no visible sign from above. The hull struck hard against the submerged rock, the impact running along the underside. It tore open a section near the front, and water began rushing in immediately. Within seconds, the front dipped. The boat lost balance fast. The stern lifted slightly as water filled the hull, and the entire vessel began to sink. People nearby saw it happen. The shift was sudden. The angle, the drop, the speed of it. There wasn't time to react or correct course. The boat went under in under 3 minutes. People nearby saw the angle change, watched the bow drop and the stern lift, and understood quickly that it wasn't going to correct. But by the time anyone moved toward the water, it was already too late. The impact had thrown Colleen forward into the console. She was likely disoriented or briefly unconscious from the strike. Witnesses said she didn't call out, didn't appear in the water, didn't surface. She went down with the boat. The navigation marker had been displaced. The anchor line she had repeatedly adjusted over the weekend had shifted the marker enough to mislead her own exit path. It wasn't a large movement, but it didn't need to be. The safe channel was narrow, and even a small change in reference could push a boat into shallow water. The case was ruled accidental. The marina was not found liable. The marker system had been correctly installed and documented, with no way to anticipate tampering between arrival and departure. The marker was repositioned afterward, and a second fixed buoy was added near the shelf as a precaution. It was February 18, 2018, in Cleveland, Ohio. The weather outside was cold, with temperatures hovering near freezing. Inside a local hospital, portions of the building were undergoing renovations, leaving some departments operating with fewer employees than usual. By the evening, most visitors had already left, and the hallways had grown noticeably quieter. Among the remaining visitors was 55-year-old Lois Fife. Lois was a retired office worker who had spent the last several months convinced that the hospital was hiding information from families. The belief started after the death of a distant relative. What began as suspicion gradually turned into an obsession. Lois frequently visited the hospital, demanding answers and accusing staff of concealing wrongdoing. She filed complaints, confronted employees, and repeatedly attempted to enter areas that were off limits to visitors. Security personnel had escorted her away from restricted sections more than once. The warnings only strengthened her belief that something was being hidden. Over time, Lois began telling other visitors that bodies were being concealed from families. She became determined to gather proof herself. Rather than trusting official explanations, she convinced herself that the only way to uncover the truth was to investigate the hospital from the inside. On February 18th, Lois arrived during visiting hours. When the time came for visitors to leave, she stayed behind. Instead of heading toward the exits, she moved through service hallways and staff corridors. Security footage later showed her making her way deeper into the building toward the pathology department. You know what stands out to me here? Lois wasn't sneaking into the morgue because she was lost or confused. She went there because she genuinely believed she was about to uncover something huge. Eventually, Lois bypassed several restricted access doors and entered the morgue area. Inside, she searched for anything that could support her claims. She looked through storage areas and photographed equipment. The longer she searched, the more convinced she became that she was getting closer to proving what she had believed for months. Then, everything changed. At some point, Lois became aware that security personnel were conducting a patrol nearby. Rather than identify herself and risk being removed from the building again, she made a decision that would ultimately cost her life. She spotted an empty refrigerated morgue drawer. Instead of leaving, Lois climbed inside. The drawer was designed for temporary body storage and extended several feet into a refrigerated compartment. To avoid being discovered, she pulled the drawer closed behind her. That decision immediately created a new problem. As the drawer shut, part of the sliding mechanism shifted out of alignment. The tray became jammed in its tracks. What Lois expected to be a temporary hiding place had suddenly become a trap. The drawer had no interior release handle because it was never meant to hold a living person. When the tray became misaligned, it jammed against the frame, and the cramped compartment left Lois with little room to force it back open. She was now confined inside a narrow metal compartment with no practical way to open it from within. The refrigerated system continued operating as intended. Temperatures inside remained just above freezing. As the hours passed, Lois remained trapped. The cold gradually affected her ability to think clearly and move effectively. Her body temperature continued dropping through the night. Eventually, the prolonged exposure became too much for her body to withstand. By the time anyone discovered what had happened, Lois had already died. The following day, maintenance personnel inspecting the area noticed unusual resistance while checking one of the storage drawers. When they opened it, they found Lois inside. Authorities later reviewed surveillance footage and reconstructed her movements through the building. The medical examiner determined that Lois died from hypothermia caused by prolonged entrapment inside the refrigerated compartment. Her death was ruled accidental. Hospital records showed a history of previous incidents involving Lois attempting to enter restricted areas. Investigators found no evidence supporting her claims of a cover-up. Instead, the evidence showed that she had entered the morgue on her own and became trapped while hiding from security personnel. In the aftermath, the facility upgraded access controls around several restricted departments. What stays with me is how ordinary the final discovery was. After months of accusations and theories, investigators didn't find a cover-up. They found Lois exactly where her own decisions had led her. It was August 4th, 2017, in Denver, Colorado. Late Friday night, traffic crawled through a crowded construction zone packed with ride-shares, pedestrians, cyclists, and concrete barriers. One of the passengers waiting was 41-year-old Dana Jacobs. Now, to understand what happens next, you have to understand who Dana was. She was a successful suburban realtor, a PTA mom, and someone who cared deeply about her public image. But according to her friends, she also had this habit of taking every minor inconvenience personally. If a waiter forgot her drink, it wasn't a mistake, it was a personal insult. And her weapon of choice? Pulling out her phone to record people until they backed down. On this night, she was tired, tipsy from a charity dinner, and already furious over a petty argument with another parent. Her driver that night was Rami Harris, a 46-year-old dad working the grueling late shift just to pay for his daughter's nursing school. He picks Dana up, pulls into that nightmare construction zone, and does exactly what any good driver would do. He keeps checking his mirrors to navigate the tight lane. However, on Dana's mind, Rami isn't looking at traffic. She decides he's staring at her chest. She starts aggressively demanding to know why he's looking at her. Rami tries to explain that he's literally just trying not to crash, but Dana's already triggered, because apparently checking your mirrors while driving is a crime now. Based on the dashcam footage report, Dana shoves her phone between the front seats, calls him a creep, and completely drowns him out. The driver even offers to just end the ride and pull over, but she's way too busy trying to go viral to listen to reason. Then, she takes it to a terrifying level. She grabs a canister of pepper spray from her purse. Rami sees it in the rearview mirror and begs her not to spray it inside a moving car. but Dana doesn't listen. She leans forward and sprays him directly in the face. Imagine this. You're driving through a construction bottleneck when, out of nowhere, your eyes, nose, and throat feel like they've been set on fire. Rami screams, jerks the wheel, and the car slams into a line of construction barrels. Chemical spray floods the cabin almost instantly, and within seconds, both of them are coughing, choking, and fighting for air. This is where panic turns fatal. Instead of staying put, a screaming Dana yanks her door handle open while the car is still rolling. Because the sedan was already hugging the concrete barrier on the passenger side, the door only opened part way before its outer edge smashed straight into the barrier. The hit violently forced the door backward against its hinges while Dana was still halfway out of the seat. One leg was still inside the car, but her upper body had lurched through the opening. That left her trapped in the narrowing space between the door and the barrier as the car kept scraping forward. Witnesses on the sidewalk watched in absolute horror as the moving car dragged the twisted door along the barrier, pinning Dana's torso in that gap and crushing her against the concrete. Her screams stopped almost instantly. The sedan continued another few feet before finally stopping, leaving her folded between the damaged door frame and the barrier. By the time paramedics arrived, Rami was stumbling around the pavement, half blind and coughing, begging people to help her. Firefighters had to literally cut the car door apart to get to Dana, but she went into cardiac arrest and died right there on the street. The autopsy report was brutal: a crushed pelvis, broken ribs, a torn lung, and massive internal bleeding. The official cause of death was ruled an accidental crush injury caused by passenger interference. Afterward, police reviewed the dashcam footage and cleared Rami completely, finding that the crash and Dana's fatal injuries began when she sprayed the driver and tried to climb out of the moving vehicle inside the construction lane. It was November 7, 2017, inside a gym in Riverside, California, during the chaotic after-work rush. The place was absolutely slammed with college kids and people straight from the office, all fighting over the same equipment. The free weight area was a total mess with heavy plates and gym bags scattered everywhere on the floor, making it a complete safety hazard. Carl Mendez was one of the regulars. He was 49 and used to be a competitive bodybuilder back in the day. But his life had hit a rough patch, injuries ended his heavy lifting, and his personal training business dried up. The gym was basically all he had left, but he acted like he owned the place. He'd hover around the squat racks for hours, staring down the younger members like they were trespassing in his backyard. It's sad, really, how Carl just can't let go of his past. That evening, a 36-year-old powerlifter named Dana Mercer was using the center squat rack. She also happened to teach women self-defense, but she was just there to get her workout done. Carl marched over during her rest break and started complaining that she was taking too long. Dana calmly told him she only had 2 sets left and turned back to her workout. Carl couldn't handle that. Witnesses later said he started pacing around, trash-talking her out loud, and then actually kicked her water bottle right across the floor. Talk about a very petty and childish behavior. Several gym members later said Carl kept circling closer between her sets, like he was trying to intimidate her into leaving. He slammed weight plates onto a nearby rack just to get her attention, while muttering insults loud enough for half the free weight section to hear. The tension got so noticeable that a few people stopped lifting and started watching from nearby benches. Once Dana finished her set and racked the weights, Carl stepped right into her face. Someone actually started filming on their phone as Carl reached out and grabbed her arm to pull her away from the rack. Witnesses said Dana tried stepping away to create distance, but Carl kept advancing chest to chest while yelling about the rack. The phone footage later showed him jerking her arm hard enough to throw her balance off briefly before she pulled free. Several people nearby started shouting at Carl to back off, but he kept moving forward anyway. Dana didn't panic. She broke his grip, planted her feet, and shoved him away to get some breathing room. It wasn't even a crazy hard push, but Carl was already off balance. As he stumbled backward, his heel caught a 45-pound weight plate that someone had carelessly left on the floor. The plate rolled slightly under his shoe as his upper body continued backward. Witnesses later said his arms flailed for balance, but there was nothing behind him except the bench. His lower back struck the edge first, twisting his body sideways, and a split second later, the side of his neck slammed directly into the exposed steel adjustment rail near the corner of the bench. He hit the floor fully conscious, but within seconds, he was telling people he couldn't move or feel anything below his neck. Witnesses later said his arms and legs stayed completely still while he struggled to breathe. They called emergency services immediately, and he was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. The impact had literally broken his neck and severely damaged his spinal cord. Doctors later found the injury had disrupted the upper part of his spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down and causing catastrophic swelling that affected his breathing overnight. He passed away the very next morning. After checking the gym's security cameras and the phone video, the police didn't file any charges against Dana. It was obvious Carl started the whole thing, and she was just defending herself. The gym ended up changing its layout and clearing out the clutter, but for a long time, nobody wanted to use that center rack because everyone remembered exactly what happened there. It was July 18, 2016, in Mesa, Arizona. Afternoon temperatures had climbed above 105 degrees Fahrenheit, pushing most activity indoors. Along a commercial stretch of East Main Street, a small, independently operated hair salon occupied a single storefront. Sunlight reflected off the front windows across light-colored tile flooring. The air conditioning system ran continuously against the desert heat. 4 styling chairs faced wall-mounted mirrors, and a shampoo station sat behind a half-wall partition near the rear. Kestra Vant, 38, arrived for a scheduled haircut. She worked in an administrative role for a residential property management company, processing applications and handling tenant paperwork. Public online records later reviewed showed a pattern of detailed complaints about businesses she visited, often escalating minor issues into formal disputes. Former co-workers described her as highly particular and unwilling to concede when she believed standards were not met. The appointment began routinely. She presented a printed reference image and emphasized precision. The stylist, a woman in her mid-20s, employed at the salon for less than 2 years, completed the cut while the schedule ran slightly behind. After the haircut, Kestra stood and examined the neckline under brighter front lighting. 2 clients later told investigators she began identifying small differences between the result and the reference photo. The stylist offered to make immediate corrections. Kestra declined further adjustment and instead initiated a sustained argument about competence and professionalism. Witnesses stated her tone escalated. She questioned the stylist's training, criticized the delay, and referenced her history of posting public reviews. The stylist attempted to de-escalate and again offered to correct the cut at no charge. Kestra continued the confrontation, drawing attention from everyone inside. During the dispute, she shifted focus to the salon setup. She moved toward the shampoo area behind the partition, stating she intended to document what she described as unsafe conditions. The stylist advised her the wash station was restricted to staff. Kestra proceeded past the barrier despite the instruction. As she entered the area, the tile was damp from recent use. A commercial salon hairdryer sat beside the sink, powered by an extension cord running across the floor from a rear outlet. The basin still contained standing water from a prior rinse. Witnesses reported that Kestra gestured toward the equipment while continuing the argument. As she stepped forward, her sandal caught the extension cord stretched across the walkway. The cord tightened beneath her foot. She attempted to steady herself by reaching toward the countertop hairdryer, which remained plugged in. She lost balance and fell forward. Her forehead struck the rim of the sink before her upper body pitched into the basin. During the fall, the energized hairdryer slipped from her hand into the water while she remained in contact with it. Those present reported hearing a sharp electrical pop, followed by a steady humming sound. The device created a conduction path through the standing water and her upper torso. Electrical current traveled across her chest and right shoulder. Her muscles contracted involuntarily, preventing release. The head impact likely caused disorientation. The circuit did not immediately trip. The stylist moved to the rear outlet and disconnected the extension cord. By the time power was cut, Kestra was unresponsive against the basin. Staff lowered her to the floor and contacted emergency services. No breathing or pulse was observed. Responders arrived within minutes and documented cardiac arrest consistent with ventricular fibrillation. Defibrillation and advanced life support were initiated and continued during transport. Resuscitation efforts at a nearby hospital did not restore sustained cardiac rhythm. She was pronounced deceased later that afternoon. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be accidental electrocution with contributing blunt force head trauma. Electrical burn patterns supported the conduction pathway described by witnesses. A subsequent safety inspection cited improper extension cord placement in a wet area and lack of ground fault protection. Required corrections were completed before the salon reopened. Investigators concluded the electrocution occurred when the power device entered standing water while she remained in contact with it inside a restricted workspace. The incident was classified as accidental. It was November 28, 2013. Outside a large retail store in Mesquite, Texas, early Black Friday shoppers gathered hours before the sale began. Employees staged pallets of electronics inside taped-off aisles. Security staff monitored the entrances as the crowd slowly thickened, waiting for the midnight doors to open. Among the early arrivals was Donna Fitch, 54. She had previously worked as a data entry clerk, but left the job in 2011 after a back injury, she said, which prevented her from working full-time. Disability checks covered basic expenses, while she earned extra money reselling discounted merchandise online. Bargain hunting had become part of Donna's routine. She tracked major sales months in advance, printing store ads and marking them with notes and highlighted prices. Living alone in Garland, Texas, she spent much of her time visiting retail stores, looking for discounted items she could resell online. Neighbors later described frequent arguments over parking spaces and return policies. On that evening, Donna arrived at the retail store shortly before 5:40 p.m., more than 4 hours before a Black Friday television sale. She drove a motorized cart straight to the electronics aisle and stopped beside pallets of boxed televisions that had been staged behind temporary barriers. Employees were directing shoppers to wait behind taped lines until the official sale time. Donna ignored the instructions almost immediately. Witnesses later said she pushed the cart forward until its rubber bumper pressed against the wrapped stack of televisions. When an employee asked her to move back with the rest of the crowd, she refused. She insisted she had arrived early and had the right to stay where she was. Several shoppers later said she began arguing loudly and refused to let anyone move ahead of her in the line. As the aisle filled, Donna continued inching the cart forward whenever staff looked away. When another customer stepped between her and the pallet, she honked the cart horn and demanded they move. Employees repeatedly warned shoppers to stay back until the display was opened safely, but each time they turned to manage the crowd, Donna rolled closer to the televisions. By 9:45 p.m., nearly 200 shoppers had packed into the aisle waiting for the sale. Donna parked the cart against the pallet and stood beside it, watching the stack closely. At 9:58 p.m., an employee stepped forward and began cutting the plastic wrap with a box cutter to open the display. Donna moved in front of the cart, pushed to the edge of the pallet, and complained the employee was taking too long after she had been waiting for hours. Before the employee finished cutting the plastic wrap, Donna stepped away from the cart and pushed directly to the front of the pallet. Ignoring another warning to step back, she grabbed the loose edge of plastic hanging from the cut line and pulled down with both hands. The wrap tore open instantly, releasing the tension that had been holding the stacked televisions in place. The first box struck Donna across the chest and shoulder. The others followed, pushing her backward into the motorized cart behind her. Her legs tangled against the cart's metal foot platform, forcing her upper body over the front bumper. Her head snapped backward and struck the linoleum floor. 2 boxes fell onto her torso, while others slid across the aisle. For several seconds, the crowd continued pressing toward the televisions, assuming the sale had begun, before a nearby shopper noticed Donna lying motionless beneath the boxes and called for help. Security reached the aisle within minutes and found her unresponsive with shallow breathing and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived about 12 minutes later, removed the boxes, stabilized her neck, and began resuscitation as she was placed on a stretcher. Donna never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by severe head trauma after her skull struck the floor. Store management closed the electronics aisle and suspended the sale, while police and emergency crews cleared the scene. It was March 22, 2018, at a roadside checkpoint outside Phoenix. Cars move forward in a slow, controlled line, each one stopping briefly before being waved through. Headlights stretch down the road, engines idling, everything moving at a steady pace. Felicia Luray was 44 and driving alone that night. She worked in insurance claims and was used to pushing until she got the outcome she wanted. That didn't stop when she left work. If something didn't go the way she expected, she didn't just let it pass. She challenged it, and if that didn't work, she pushed it further. Waiting wasn't something she handled well, and being told to move along without getting her point across bothered her. If she felt like something should be handled differently, she treated it like it was her place to say so. When she reached the checkpoint, the stop started the way it always does. She slowed down and pulled forward when directed, but instead of letting it stay simple, she shifted it. She started bringing up her driving record, like it needed to be checked or recognized right there. It wasn't part of what was happening, but she kept it going anyway, like it should matter in that moment. That's where things slowed down. Instead of finishing the stop and moving on, she held her position longer than necessary. The officer stepped away briefly toward a nearby vehicle, leaving her waiting in place while the line behind her started to back up. That pause stretched longer than it needed to. She remained in her vehicle at first, but her attention shifted away from the checkpoint itself. The process had already been interrupted, and instead of settling back into it, she stayed keyed in, watching, waiting, looking for something else to focus on. That's when the barking started. Behind her, secured in the rear section of that nearby vehicle, a service dog began barking. It was steady and loud, carrying clearly in the otherwise quiet stretch of road. At first, it was just background noise, but she didn't ignore it. She turned her attention toward it, watching it through the rear of the vehicle. The barking didn't stop, and instead of focusing on her own situation, she fixated on it. To her, it became part of the problem, something she shouldn't have to deal with while she was being held there. The longer it went on, the more it held her attention. She shifted in her seat, then leaned slightly to get a better view. The dog remained secured, moving within its confined space, reacting to the environment around it. The barking stayed consistent. That was enough. She opened her door and stepped out. Instead of staying where she was, she moved a few steps toward the rear of the nearby vehicle, close enough now that the sound was louder, more direct. She had a plastic water bottle in her hand. Instead of stepping back or leaving it alone, she made a decision to deal with it herself. She threw the bottle toward the dog. It wasn't forceful, but it didn't need to be. It was enough to trigger a reaction. The dog lunged forward against its restraint immediately. The movement was sudden and sharp, accompanied by a louder burst of barking. That's when she reacted. She stepped backward quickly, trying to create distance. She was already close to the edge of the lane, and behind her was a raised concrete curb. Her heel caught it. The backward motion didn't stop. With her weight already shifting, there was no time to recover. She lost balance and fell straight back. The back of her head struck the edge of the curb. It happened in a single motion. Throw, lunge, step back, fall. People nearby saw the entire sequence clearly. There was no contact between her and the dog at any point. The restraint held, and the distance remained. She did not get up. After stepping away, personnel at the checkpoint returned to the lane and found her lying unresponsive near the curb. The area showed no signs of additional movement or secondary impact. The position of her body and the injury were consistent with a direct backward fall onto the curb. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. The officer and checkpoint personnel were cleared entirely. She had exited her vehicle without instruction and moved toward a secured area on her own. The service dog was evaluated by its handler and cleared for continued duty. No action was taken against the animal. It was formally closed as an accidental death. It was April 9, 2022, in Phoenix, Arizona. The day was warm and dry, and a busy shopping center parking lot was crowded with vehicles and shoppers. It seemed like a routine afternoon, but a minor disagreement between two strangers was about to escalate far beyond a parking complaint. Most parking lot disagreements last less than a minute. Someone gets annoyed, a few words are exchanged, and everyone goes their separate ways. For 46-year-old Miranda Ferre, things rarely ended that simply. The small business owner had a reputation for confronting people over perceived slights, and once she felt disrespected, disrespected, walking away was often the last thing on her mind. That afternoon, Miranda parked beside another vehicle near one of the store entrances. The neighboring vehicle was legally parked within its space, but Miranda immediately took issue with the way it was positioned. When the other driver stepped out, Miranda confronted her. The woman appeared willing to move on and continue shopping. Miranda wasn't. What should have been a brief exchange continued as the woman walked away. Miranda followed behind her, continuing the argument. As they moved through the parking lot, the distance covered grew from a few feet to multiple rows of parked vehicles. The longer the disagreement lasted, the more invested Miranda became in it. Instead of letting the matter go, she continued pursuing the woman through the lot. More shoppers began noticing the confrontation. Some slowed down to watch, while others simply tried to avoid it. Sometimes people get so focused on winning an argument that they forget why it started in the first place. As the confrontation stretched on, several bystanders began recording on their phones. Even then, Miranda refused to disengage. Evidence later reviewed by investigators showed that the woman repeatedly attempted to continue on her way while Miranda continued following her. The disagreement moved through a large section of the parking lot before reaching a breaking point. Eventually, Miranda grabbed the woman's shopping cart during the confrontation. That moment escalated the situation immediately. The woman attempted to create distance. Miranda continued moving toward her. A short time later, the woman deployed pepper spray at close range. The spray struck Miranda directly in the face, affecting her eyes, nose, and mouth. At first, the reaction appeared typical. Miranda began coughing and stumbling as nearby shoppers watched from a distance. But within minutes, the situation became far more serious. Miranda's breathing became increasingly difficult. The swelling inside her airway progressed rapidly. As her condition worsened, nearby shoppers began recognizing that this was no longer a normal reaction. Most people watching probably thought the confrontation was over. Unfortunately, it was only getting worse. The sounds of wheezing became noticeable. Her breathing grew more strained. Before long, she collapsed onto the pavement. Bystanders called emergency services and attempted to help while waiting for paramedics to arrive. Emergency crews quickly recognized signs of a severe allergic reaction and began treatment at the scene. Despite those efforts, Miranda's condition continued deteriorating. Her airway became critically obstructed and she suffered cardiac arrest. She was transported to a nearby hospital, but doctors were unable to save her. The medical examiner later determined that Miranda died from an anaphylactic reaction triggered by exposure to a component within the pepper spray. Investigators reviewed numerous cell phone videos recorded throughout the confrontation. The footage documented the dispute from its early stages in the parking lot through the medical emergency that followed. Authorities also examined whether the use of force met legal standards under the circumstances. In the end, investigators found that the original parking complaint was minor. The evidence showed that Miranda repeatedly chose to continue the confrontation long after opportunities to leave had presented themselves. Her death was officially ruled a fatal allergic reaction caused by exposure to pepper spray during the incident. It was July 21, 2016, in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Families were lining up for the Alpine coaster when a dispute over the queue turned deadly. Her name was Chantal Eve Pikes, 45 years old. Now, Chantal was an executive assistant from Spokane, and according to those who knew her, she was a lot. Recently divorced and hyper-focused on keeping control, she had spent her entire summer trip hate posting online about everything from parking prices to blocked photo spots. Apparently, she was already on edge when she stepped into the coaster line that day. And here is where things got ugly. The line was moving slowly because ride operators were doing their jobs, sorting riders by height and weight to keep everyone safe. Right ahead of Chantal was a Hispanic family of 5. Their youngest boy was too small to ride alone, so the attendant called the dad forward to double up with him. Instead of seeing common sense ride safety, Chantal saw a personal insult. She started screaming, accusing the family of cutting the line and claiming favoritism. Mind you, other tourists were already pulling out their phones recording her mid-meltdown. The attendants immediately told her to get back out. One moved toward the cart while another hit the hold button to pause the launch behind her. But Chantal had already yanked the lap belt across herself and started shouting that if anyone touched her, she'd sue the park. With a queue backing up behind her and the family's cart already climbing the lift, staff made the call to keep her seated, recheck the restraint, and give her the safety instructions one more time rather than physically drag her out in front of a crowd. It wasn't that they approved of what she did, they were were trying to avoid turning a meltdown into a physical confrontation on the platform. So they locked her belt, confirmed the cart was secure, and gave her the standard spiel again. Keep both hands on the brake levers, maintain distance from the cart ahead, and slow down at the posted signs. Chantal just yelled over them, waved dismissively at the family's cart in front of her, and the operator finally sent her off. If you've never been on an alpine coaster, you control your own speed using handbrakes. The dad and his little boy ahead of her were taking it super easy because the kid was terrified. But track video showed Chantal was doing the exact opposite. She was flying down the track, closing the gap instantly. And get this, she was riding one-handed so she could use her other hand to flip off or gesture at the family ahead of her. Then came a sharp left curve. The dad braked safely, but Chantal didn't. With a deafening, metallic shriek, the kind of sound that sets your teeth on edge, Chantal's front bumper slammed into the back of the family's cart just as both sleds hit the curve. The family's cart jolted forward, but thankfully, they held their line. Chantal's sled stayed on the track too, but the impact shoved her violently sideways inside the sled at the worst possible moment. Because she had taken the turn with such reckless speed, she wasn't braced for what came next. Her body became nothing more than dead weight. Her torso whipped toward the outside of the turn. Her head collided with the unforgiving steel frame, snapping back as the sled shuddered against the guard structure. It's hard to even think about, but she was folded awkwardly into the seat, her lower body crushed against the restraint bar, left completely at the mercy of the physics she couldn't outrun. The operator hit the emergency stop, and paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes, but it was already too late. Chantal was gone. The medical examiner confirmed she died from massive blunt force trauma and crushing injuries. State inspectors later checked the track, the brakes, and the carts, and found nothing mechanically wrong with the ride. Investigators concluded the crash happened because Chantal ignored repeated brake warnings, followed the cart ahead too closely, and entered the curve at unsafe speed before rear-ending the family's sled. The operators were not blamed for the collision itself. The park still reviewed whether staff should have shut down the dispatch the moment she forced her way into the cart and refused instructions. The family she targeted walked away physically unhurt, but the little boy she had been screaming about ended up watching her die just feet behind him. And that's the part that really sticks with me. She was so determined to prove she deserved to go first that she crashed straight into the very family she'd been raging at minutes earlier. It was June 3, 2014, out by Lake Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. The morning was chilly and damp, with a thick mist rising off the lake and boat spray leaving the public wooden dock incredibly slick. Only a few guys were out there fishing in the cold air when Norm Baxter walked down, looking for a fight. Norm was 55 and used to run a local plumbing business, but after a messy fallout with his partners, he sold it and just became incredibly bitter. His neighbors said he was totally paranoid. He started nailing homemade no trespassing signs to trees, taking photos of people's license plates, and harassing anyone who came near the dock, even though it was 100% public property. Honestly, it feels like he was just looking for reasons to be angry. That morning, 62-year-old Leonard Red Elk pulled up to fish. Leonard was a retired high school wrestling coach from Montana who spent years mentoring kids. He had a bad knee and moved slowly, but he just wanted a quiet spot to relax. The dock was slick from lake mist and boat spray, and several old steel mooring cleats along the edge were badly rusted. One near the corner had partially broken loose, leaving a jagged metal rod exposed above the wood. Leonard was fixing his bait when Norm marched down, filming him on his phone and accusing him of trespassing. Leonard calmly pointed to the county sign and tried ignoring him, but Norm kept pacing around, ranting about outsiders. Then, Norm took it way too far. He reached down, grabbed Leonard's fishing line while continuing to shout, and snapped it right in half. Leonard stood up and stepped back to keep his cool, but Norm stepped right into his space and shoved him hard in the chest. Norm wasn't done. He swung a wild punch at Leonard's head. Because of his wrestling background, Leonard's instincts instantly took over. He ducked under the punch and forcefully drove forward to stop the attack, wrapping Norm around the waist and pushing him backward across the wet dock boards instead of simply backing away. The moment Leonard drove into him, both men slid several feet across the slick wood, almost like they were on ice. Witnesses fishing nearby later said Norm's shoes completely lost traction as his heels skidded through the water and algae coating the dock surface. Leonard was still trying to control him and stop the swing when their combined weight crashed sideways toward the damaged corner section. Both men lost balance almost immediately on the slick dock. Witnesses later said Leonard still had hold of Norm when they crashed sideways near the damaged cleat. Norm's lower back and abdomen slammed onto the exposed steel anchor rod protruding beside the dock, and the metal penetrated deep into his stomach. Norm immediately went limp as the air left his lungs. Leonard immediately let go and tried pulling him away from the exposed rod while nearby fishermen rushed over with towels and life jackets. Blood spread rapidly between the dock boards and dripped directly into the water beneath them. Emergency services were called immediately, but the metal rod had punctured vital organs, causing massive, uncontrollable internal bleeding. Norm passed away at the hospital that evening. The medical examiner confirmed that the severe internal damage and blood loss from the puncture wound is what killed him. Investigators later reviewed witness statements and cell phone footage from nearby boaters. Prosecutors ultimately ruled that Leonard acted in lawful self-defense because Norm initiated the assault, and the fatal injury resulted primarily from the hazardous dock conditions rather than an intentional attempt to seriously injure him. No charges were filed against Leonard. It was September 12, 2015, in Tallahassee, Florida. A 110-foot cell tower stood inside a fenced gravel lot on the eastern edge of the city, surrounded by chain-link barriers and posted high-voltage warning signs. The isolated service site sat away from nearby homes, with electrical equipment humming at the base. A contracted tower technician, 52, had arrived earlier that morning to service ground-level components inside a metal cabinet near the base. The gate was typically kept locked, but he had left it temporarily unsecured while retrieving equipment from his truck parked just outside the perimeter. High-voltage warnings in faded yellow and black lettering were posted along the fence and cabinet doors. Mavia Klatt, 35, worked in a medical billing office and had spent months posting complaints online about poor cell reception in her neighborhood. She frequently tagged her service provider in public posts, accusing the company of negligence and overcharging customers. In messages and comment threads, she insisted the nearby tower was not functioning properly and stated she would personally intervene if the issue was not resolved. That afternoon, after another dropped call, she drove to the tower site. When she saw the gate partially open, she entered the lot and began calling out toward the structure, demanding an explanation for what she believed was ongoing service failure. The contracted technician was inside a ground-level cabinet and had temporarily unlocked the tower's climb shield to access the ladder, leaving it unsecured while retrieving equipment from his truck. Mavia walked directly to the exposed ladder system and began climbing without a harness, helmet, or fall protection. When the technician stepped outside moments later and saw her several feet above ground, he ordered her to come down and warned her that the equipment was energized. She continued ascending despite the warning, insisting she had a right to inspect what she believed was faulty infrastructure. She climbed to approximately 35 feet before slowing near a mounted junction assembly supplying power to transmission components above. As she steadied herself on the ladder, she reached toward a thick cable entering the housing, attempting to locate what she believed was the source of the service problem. Witness accounts described a sudden flash, consistent with an electrical arc, followed by a sharp cracking sound. Investigators later determined she likely contacted an energized component or created a conductive path between live equipment and the grounded tower. The resulting shock would have been instantaneous. Her body stiffened briefly before she lost muscular control. She fell backward from roughly 30 feet. During the descent, she struck a horizontal crossbrace about 10 feet below, altering her trajectory before dropping the remaining distance onto the gravel surface. The technician called emergency services immediately and approached without moving her, recognizing the risk of spinal injury. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. She was unresponsive, pulseless, and had sustained catastrophic trauma consistent with both high-voltage electrical injury and a fall from height. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be combined electrocution and blunt force trauma. The tower operator confirmed the structure, and electrical systems were functioning within regulatory standards at the time. No service malfunction was detected. Following the investigation, the contractor reinforced perimeter fencing, added redundant locking mechanisms to the gate, and reviewed site security protocols to prevent unauthorized entry during service intervals. Authorities ruled the death an accidental trespass-related electrocution resulting from unauthorized access to restricted infrastructure. Investigators found no evidence of equipment malfunction or operator negligence, concluding the tower had been operating within regulatory standards. The case was closed without charges. It was August 7, 2015, in the parking garage of a busy department store in Sacramento, California. Late-morning shoppers moved between cars and elevator entrances, while vehicles slowly circled the narrow lanes searching for open spaces. Concrete pillars divided rows of tightly spaced stalls along the garage walls. Standing inside one of those empty spaces was Rhonda Pfeiffer, 61. Rhonda had driven to the store with her husband earlier that morning. He had gone inside to return an item while she stayed behind in the garage to wait for him. As the lot filled, Rhonda stepped into an open stall near the wall, intending to hold it so her husband could bring the car around when he returned. She placed her purse on the ground near the back of the stall and stood squarely in the center of the space, clearly claiming it as her own. Other drivers continued moving through the lane searching for parking. Moments later, a compact sedan turned down the row and slowed when the driver spotted the open stall. The driver was Marcus Dalton, 34, who had been circling the garage for several minutes trying to find a spot. As he began turning into the stall, he saw Rhonda standing inside it. Rhonda immediately stepped forward and raised her hand toward the windshield, signaling him to stop. Marcus halted the car halfway into the turn and lowered his window. Rhonda began insisting the space was already taken and pointed toward the entrance ramp, explaining that her husband would be bringing their car down any moment. Marcus told her parking spaces were meant for vehicles, not people. Rhonda refused to move. Instead, she stepped farther into the stall and positioned herself directly between the approaching car and the concrete wall behind her, making it impossible for him to pull fully into the space. The exchange quickly grew louder. Several nearby shoppers paused beside their cars as the confrontation continued through the open window. Marcus again told her to step aside so he could park, but Rhonda remained planted in the stall with her arms folded, refusing to move. After several seconds, Marcus placed the car in drive again. Witnesses later said he appeared to be trying to inch the vehicle forward slightly, hoping the movement would pressure her to step out of the way. The sedan rolled ahead a few inches, but Rhonda refused to move. As he tried to control the brake with his foot hovering between the pedals, the pressure shifted to the accelerator, and the car lunged forward. Rhonda tried to step sideways, but there was little space between the vehicle and the concrete wall behind her. The front bumper struck her legs and forced her backward. A split second later, her body was pinned between the front of the sedan and the concrete wall. Marcus slammed the brake immediately, but the brief burst of acceleration had already pushed the car several feet into the space. Bystanders shouted for him to reverse, and he quickly backed the vehicle away. Rhonda collapsed onto the garage floor beside the wall as people nearby called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found her unresponsive with severe injuries to her chest and abdomen. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The county medical examiner later determined that the cause of death was crush injuries to the chest and internal organs sustained when she was pinned between the moving vehicle and the concrete wall. Investigators reviewed garage security footage confirming the argument and the brief acceleration of the car into the space. Authorities determined Marcus had intended only to inch forward to force Rhonda out of the stall, but pressing the wrong pedal caused the vehicle to lunge ahead. The death was ruled accidental, and prosecutors declined to file criminal charges. It was October 9, 2015, at a remote campground in northern Idaho. small cabins spaced out along a gravel loop, surrounded by trees, with just enough distance between them to feel separate. Once it got dark, everything went quiet. No traffic, no background noise, just still air and a steady drop in temperature. Carla Ives was 55 and staying alone for the weekend. She worked in retail management, and that need to be in control didn't really turn off when she left work. If something was labeled, limited, or set up a certain way, she didn't just follow it, she questioned it. And if it didn't make sense to her, she ignored it. She didn't like being told how much she could use or what something was for. If it looked available, she treated it like it was just sitting there going to waste. And if no one stepped in to stop her, that was enough for her to assume it wasn't a real rule to begin with. She had a habit of testing things like that, starting small, then pushing further once nothing pushed back. Near the main area, there was a large stack of firewood set aside for cabin use. It was clearly divided, so each cabin got a set amount, enough for a controlled burn. The wood itself was freshly cut, still green, heavier than dry wood, and not meant for indoor use in a closed space. That part actually mattered, but it wasn't something she thought about. She noticed the stack the first evening and paused for a second, just looking at it. From her point of view, it didn't make much sense. Why was there that much wood sitting there when she'd only been given a small bundle? It looked unused, untouched, so she decided it didn't add up. To her, it felt like overstock, like whoever set it up had misjudged how much people would need. And if it wasn't being used, then what was the issue? So she took some. At first, it was just an extra armful, easy to justify. No one said anything. No one came over to stop her. That was enough. Later that night, she went back and took more. The next day, she did it again. Another trip, another load. At that point, it wasn't about needing it anymore. It was about the idea that it shouldn't just be sitting there unused. She took more than she could realistically burn in one night, stacking it up like she was planning ahead instead of overdoing it. Instead of using it outside or burning it gradually, she carried most of it into her cabin and stacked it along one wall. She wanted it inside, within reach, so she wouldn't have to go back out in the cold. It felt more efficient to her. Everything in one place, no extra effort. That night, the temperature dropped quickly. She sealed the cabin up, windows closed, door shut tight to keep the heat in. The space was small, and once everything was closed off, the air inside stayed trapped. She started a fire in the stove using the wood she had taken, but green wood doesn't burn cleanly. It smolders more than it burns, producing heavier smoke and releasing more gases than properly dried wood. The stove still functioned, but without enough airflow, it didn't burn efficiently. After some time, she noticed the fire wasn't holding the way she expected. Instead of adjusting airflow or reducing the load, she added more wood to keep it going. That only made the burn less efficient. More smoke, more buildup, less clean heat. She kept the cabin sealed. After a while, she started to feel off. At first, it was mild, a headache, a little dizziness, a general feeling of fatigue, the kind of thing that's easy to ignore, especially when you're alone. She didn't change anything, didn't open a window, didn't step outside. She stayed where she was. As the night went on, the symptoms became more noticeable. The dizziness lasted longer. The fatigue got heavier. When she stood up, she had to steady herself for a second before moving. Her coordination wasn't as sharp, but even then, she didn't shift what she was doing. No ventilation, no fresh air. The fire continued to burn poorly. The air inside the cabin continued to change. At some point, the symptoms crossed from uncomfortable to disorienting, the kind where thinking clearly becomes harder, where reacting takes longer than it should. By then, the environment inside had already shifted too far. She remained inside. She was later found unresponsive in the cabin. The cause of death was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning. The sealed cabin and lack of ventilation had allowed gases to build up to fatal levels, and the green wood, which burns less cleanly than dried, had made the situation worse. The campground was reviewed, but no staff negligence was found. The firewood labeling was considered adequate, and the cabin stove was properly functioning. The green wood supply was moved to a locked enclosure with clearer posted signage afterward. The case was ruled accidental. It was August 7, 2019, in Estes Park, Colorado. A popular trailhead outside town was busy with tourists preparing for outdoor activities. Families gathered near the parking area, while horseback riding groups assembled before departing on afternoon tours. Daphne Keel wasn't a regulator, park employee, or part of the horseback riding business. Yet after months of unsuccessful complaints, she had begun treating the trailhead like it was her responsibility. The 53-year-old vacation rental owner had become known for involving herself in local disputes, especially when she believed other people were ignoring rules or creating problems. In Daphne's mind, the horseback tours never should have been operating there in the first place. She disliked seeing large horses near pedestrians and believed the tours created an unnecessary risk for visitors. Over the previous months, she had repeatedly contacted local officials and filed complaints about the operation. Each time, inspectors found no violations and allowed the business to continue. Most people would have moved on after that. Daphne doubled down. The more her complaints were dismissed, the more determined she became to prove that officials were overlooking a danger. She started confronting guides directly and frequently inserted herself into conversations with customers preparing for rides. When she arrived at the trailhead on August 7th, several tour groups were gathering near the staging area. Guides were organizing riders, checking equipment, and reviewing safety instructions before departure. Daphne immediately approached the operation. Staff explained that the business was authorized to operate there and that the horses were under control. The explanation had no effect. Instead of leaving, Daphne continued challenging the guides and criticizing the tours in front of customers. I've seen plenty of people appoint themselves as the rule enforcer. The problem is that authority doesn't magically appear just because you feel strongly about something. As the discussion continued, Daphne moved closer to the horses. The animals remained calm and stood under handler supervision, but several guides became concerned as she continued entering their space during the confrontation. One horse stood near the edge of the group. The animal weighed approximately 1,100 pounds and was being held by a guide. To avoid further conflict, staff attempted to move the horse away from the argument. Daphne followed. As the horse was repositioned, she continued directing her attention toward both the riders and the guides. The disagreement that had started several feet away was now happening within arm's reach of the animal. The horse began showing signs of uneasiness as people moved around it. Guides attempted to keep the situation under control and create more distance. Daphne continued advancing. Up to that point, the situation was still just an argument. Then, Daphne stepped toward the horse and slapped it across the face. The reaction was immediate. Startled by the strike, the horse kicked backward with both hind legs. The movement happened in less than a second. One hoof struck Daphne directly in the center of her chest and along the left side of her ribcage. The impact launched her backward several feet before she hit the compacted ground. The horse didn't know anything about complaints, permits, or arguments. It only knew that someone had just hit it. The force of the kick caused devastating injuries. Multiple ribs fractured instantly and fragments of bone damaged nearby organs. Severe internal bleeding began almost immediately. Daphne lost consciousness within moments. People nearby rushed to help while emergency services were called. Responders arrived within minutes and began treatment at the scene. Because of the extent of her injuries, she was airlifted to a regional trauma center where surgeons attempted emergency intervention. Despite those efforts, the damage to her chest and internal organs was too severe. She died from her injuries. Investigators later reviewed videos recorded by tourists and examined evidence collected at the scene. The footage consistently showed that the horse reacted only after being struck. Officials concluded that the animal's response was defensive and consistent with normal horse behavior. The irony here is hard to miss. Daphne spent months arguing that the horses were dangerous, then ignored every warning meant to keep her safe around one. The medical examiner determined that Daphne died from catastrophic blunt force injuries to the chest and internal bleeding caused by the horse's kick. Tour operations resumed after the investigation concluded, and officials found no violations by the horseback riding company. The incident was ruled a tragic accident brought on by Daphne's decision to approach and strike the animal. It was March 3rd, 2019. Outside, Plano was colder than most people expected for early March, with damp air and a sharp chill still hanging around from the morning. Inside the grocery store, the checkout lanes were backed up with Sunday shoppers, half-full carts, and people quietly inching forward, waiting to pay and get home. Just a few registers back stood Jessica Laurie, 52. Jessica was a cosmetics sales director, someone who spent her life obsessed with appearances and pulling rank. According to her her own daughter, Jessica had a toxic habit. She loved turning minor inconveniences into full-blown public standoffs. If a rule didn't suit her, she'd try to break it. On this particular day, Jessica finds herself in line behind Christopher and Marilou Hanks. Right beside Marilou's cart is a beautiful golden retriever in a service harness. Marilou has type 1 diabetes, and this highly trained dog is literally there to keep her alive by alerting her to dangerous blood sugar drops. The dog is being a total professional and was actually just lying quietly on the floor. But Jessica spots him and immediately loses her mind. She demands to know why there's a dog in the store, claims she's highly allergic, and orders the couple to let her cut in front of them. The cashier tries to defuse the situation, offering to open a brand new empty register just for Jessica. But Jessica doesn't want another lane. She wants a fight. As she gets louder, the manager steps in, backs up the couple, and offers to move Jessica again. She refuses. Instead, she leans over, demands proof the dog is real, and actually reaches down to grab the dog's harness. Christopher immediately slaps her hand away to protect the animal. At this point, the manager has had enough and kicks Jessica out. 2 employees escort her out, but Jessica is still screaming, filming everyone, and vowing to report them. Instead of going to her car, she paces outside like a heat-seeking missile, waiting. A few minutes later, Christopher and Marilou walk out. Jessica falls right in behind them, phone out, still harassing them. They happen to pass the covered outdoor cart return bay at the exact moment an employee is bringing in a massive, heavy train of nested shopping carts using a motorized cart pusher. Jessica is crowding the couple so aggressively that she lunges at the dog a second time. Christopher instinctively blocks her hand. It wasn't a hard shove, but Jessica is already off balance, distracted by her phone, and standing right on the painted edge of the cart lane. She stumbles backward, directly into the mouth of the cart bay. The employee spots her and slams the emergency stop, but a cart train that heavy doesn't just freeze. Even with the power cut, the long chain of metal carts keeps rolling forward under its own weight, the nested rows bunching tighter as they push into one another. Jessica tries to twist away, but there's nowhere to go. The front carts press her into the square steel end post and keep creeping forward inch by inch, driven by the leftover momentum of everything stacked behind them. It isn't one violent hit. It's slower than that, worse than that. A grinding, unstoppable squeeze as the weight of the entire cart train compresses her pelvis and thighs against the post. She screamed once, then again, as the carts kept forcing inward before finally settling. The employee called emergency services while bystanders desperately tried to pull the carts back. Jessica is conscious, but fading fast, bleeding heavily from catastrophic internal injuries. By the time EMS arrives 6 minutes later, she's slipping away. She goes into cardiac arrest in the ambulance and dies. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental death from massive crush injuries. The force shattered her pelvis and tore major blood vessels. Police reviewed the store footage and cleared both Christopher and the employee. Christopher was just defending his wife's service dog, and the cart pusher simply couldn't stop in time. It is a deeply tragic, surreal way to die. And the wildest part? The official report noted that within the very first minute of the argument, Jessica was offered her own private checkout lane. She chose to hunt down a confrontation instead, and it ultimately cost her her life. It was March 14, 2015, at a crowded resto bar near the shipping docks in Cebu, Philippines. A regional basketball tournament had just ended, so the place was packed with exhausted workers, players, and regulars. It had the kind of atmosphere where you could already tell somebody was eventually going to start a fight. One of the patrons that night was Randy Castro, 48. He worked as a warehouse supervisor, and by all accounts, he was a guy who liked to be in control. But his personal life was a bit messy. He was going through a tough separation, having issues at work, and regulars noticed he'd been drinking heavily and looking for fights. That night, he was sitting right by the stage, getting visibly annoyed with the karaoke, saying it's too noisy and crowded. Meanwhile, sitting on the opposite side of the room was 63-year-old Lito Mamak, though everyone just called him Tade Lito. Now, back in the day, Lito was actually a regional boxing champion, but you'd never guess it by looking at him. Severe arthritis had slowed him down quite a bit, and these days, he just quietly got by working late-night cleaning jobs. He kept entirely to himself, sitting silently in the corner for a good hour before he finally decided to get up and head toward the stage. Around 11:10 p.m., Lito got up to sing a rock song. He wasn't a rock star, but he was screaming it out and doing his best to hit those high, loud notes. Right away, Randy started heckling him from his plastic stool, loudly mocking his singing over the heavy guitar tracks. Lito just ignored him, and kept on with the song. But Randy wouldn't let it go. He climbed onto the low wooden stage with a beer bottle still hanging from one hand and ripped the microphone straight out of Lito's grip mid-song, causing a burst of loud feedback through the speakers. People nearby started turning in their seats immediately as Randy staggered around the stage, mocking Lito's accent and exaggerated singing while laughing at him. When Lito tried to get the mic back, Randy shoved him into a speaker stand. The metal frame rattled loudly and nearly tipped over. Lito didn't swing back. He raised both hands chest high, trying to calm things down while backing away from him. Instead, Randy stepped closer until they were nearly chest to chest, screaming over the karaoke music while beer splashed from the bottle onto the stage floor. Then, without warning, Randy swung his hand across and slapped Lito hard enough to snap his head sideways. And that's when a boxer's instinct took over. Lito slipped the slap, pivoted, and countered with a short, quick right hook, a classic boxer's reflex, just trying to get the guy off him. It landed flush along Randy's jaw with a dull crack that several people near the stage later said they could actually hear over the karaoke music. Randy's legs buckled instantly, and he stumbled backward, completely losing his footing. He tried reaching for the speaker stand with one hand, but missed completely. The back of his heel slid off the stage first before his entire body dropped backward onto the concrete below. He fell right off the side of the stage, and the back of his skull hit the bare concrete floor. The impact was sickening. The entire bar went dead silent instantly. Randy was just lying there on the ground, twitching, as blood started pooling on the floor. Emergency services were called immediately, and paramedics got there after several minutes, but the damage was done. Paramedics later found Randy unconscious and breathing irregularly before rushing him to the hospital in critical condition. Randy went into a coma and passed away the next afternoon. When the medical examiner looked into it, they found that the punch didn't kill him. It was the concrete floor. The fall caused a fractured skull and massive brain swelling. In the end, after interviewing over 20 witnesses and watching the bar's security tapes, the police didn't file any charges against Lito. It was clear he was just defending himself. It's just a sobering reminder of how fast a stupid bar argument can spiral. One guy couldn't handle his liquor or his temper, and it ended up costing him his life over a karaoke song. Later on, the bar actually padded the edges of the stage and changed their rules. But that's what a terrible price to pay for a lesson learned. It was March 3rd, 2017, in Dayton, Ohio. A layer of gray cloud cover hung low over a commercial strip where a small independent coffee shop occupied the corner of a brick storefront. The sidewalks were damp from overnight rain, reflecting muted traffic lights at the intersection. Inside, fluorescent lights reflected off freshly mopped white tile floors. A waist-high swinging gate separated the customer area from the narrow workspace behind the counter. The hum of refrigeration units blended with the hiss of pressurized steam from the espresso machine. Liddy Spoff, 41, worked part-time at a dental office, managing front desk duties. Outside of work, she maintained an active social media presence, documenting what she described as poor customer service. Over several years, she posted detailed complaints about minor inconveniences, often including photos and demands for refunds. Those familiar with her described a pattern. When told something could not be done, she often tried to prove it could. That morning, she ordered a latte and instructed the barista to make it exactly boiling. The 19-year-old employee explained that milk is typically steamed to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit to preserve texture and prevent scalding. Commercial espresso machines generate steam above 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but it is controlled before contacting milk. Heating milk to boiling, 212 degrees Fahrenheit at standard pressure, would ruin its structure and create safety risks. Liddy insisted the machine was capable of higher heat and accused the barista of not knowing how to operate it properly. As the explanation continued, Liddy stepped closer to the counter. Without permission, she unlatched the waist-high gate and entered the employee-only area. The barista, startled, backed toward the register and told her to step away from the equipment. Two customers waiting in line moved toward the exit. The espresso machine had just completed a shot extraction. The portafilter remained locked into the group head, where water had been forced through compacted coffee grounds at roughly 9 bars of pressure. The boiler maintained steam pressure slightly above 1 bar for milk frothing. nothing. Liddy grabbed the portafilter handle and tried to twist it free. Because pressure inside the group head had not fully dissipated, the seal resisted briefly before releasing abruptly. When the portafilter disengaged, a burst of superheated water and steam expelled outward from the group head. The liquid temperature exceeded 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The spray struck the left side of her face and neck at close range. At the same time, her reflex caused her elbow to hit the steam wand control, opening it further. A second plume of steam vented across her upper chest. She recoiled, losing footing on the damp tile. Her heel slid against the smooth surface. She fell backward, striking her shoulder against a wall-mounted shelving bracket. The metal support bent, dislodging ceramic mugs that shattered across the floor. The barista shut off the steam valve and hit the emergency cutoff switch within seconds. Another employee called 911. The entire sequence, from entry behind the counter to shutdown, lasted less than 30 seconds. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes. Liddy was conscious, but in severe distress. Paramedics documented deep partial thickness and full thickness burns to her face, neck, and upper chest. Burn specialists estimated the injuries covered about 18% of her total body surface area, with critical airway involvement from steam inhalation. Swelling progressed rapidly despite intubation and aggressive fluid resuscitation at the regional burn center 12 miles away. She developed respiratory failure and burn-related shock later that evening and was pronounced deceased. A subsequent investigation reviewed surveillance footage and inspected the equipment. The espresso machine's pressure gauges and safety valves were operating within manufacturer's specifications. Commercial machines include pressure relief systems, but they cannot prevent injury if a pressurized portafilter is removed too early. Investigators concluded the incident resulted from unauthorized interference with functioning equipment. The shop was not cited for violations, but installed a self-closing, lockable gate and added warning signage. The barista received counseling and later transferred locations. It was October 19th, 2018, in a quiet residential subdivision in Plano, Texas. Late afternoon light settled over a row of fenced backyards as residents returned home from work. Lawnmowers and sprinklers hummed across the block while neighbors moved between garages and patios. Among them was Vivian Truax, 52, who worked from home processing insurance claims. Outside of work, she focused heavily on neighborhood issues as secretary of the Homeowners Association, regularly documenting rule violations and reporting them to the board. Neighbors knew her for printed notices, photographs of yards, and long emails quoting HOA rules line by line. She frequently reported overgrown grass, holiday decorations left up too long, vehicles parked improperly in driveways, and trash cans visible from the street, leading to frequent arguments with neighbors. During the previous summer, a new resident, Carla Mendoza, installed a 6-foot wooden privacy fence along the back property line, separating the two homes. Within days, Vivian began disputing its placement. She insisted the fence crossed roughly 2 inches into her property. Carla had hired a licensed contractor and provided the HOA with a copy of the property survey used during installation. The measurements showed the fence sitting inside her own lot. The HOA reviewed the documents and closed the complaint. Vivian refused to accept the decision. Over the next several weeks, she repeatedly photographed the fence and sent multiple emails to the HOA board, insisting that the survey had to be wrong. When the board stopped responding, she began confronting Carla directly across the fence line. On the afternoon of October 19th, Vivian walked into her backyard carrying a tape measure and a metal garden trowel. Carla was not home. Vivian stretched the tape along several fence posts, repeating measurements she had already taken many times before. Each time, she concluded the posts were leaning slightly over the line. After several minutes, she tried to pull one of the fence panels loose. The panels were secured with screws and steel brackets. When she tugged on the wood, it barely moved. She tried prying at the base with the garden trowel, but the bracket held firm. Frustrated, Vivian stepped onto a landscaping stone beside the fence and grabbed the top rail with both hands. She began climbing over the fence, intending to reach the other side and inspect the posts directly. The rail sat a little over 6 feet above the ground. As she lifted her right leg across the top, her foot slipped against the smooth wood. Her balance shifted sideways, and she slid forward across the narrow rail. Behind the fence stood a small backyard shed with a metal gutter and downspout beside the fence line. Earlier that afternoon, a ladder used while cleaning the gutter had loosened an exterior electrical line supplying power to the shed, part of an older backyard electrical setup. The cable slipped from its anchor and rested against the metal gutter, energizing it with household current. As Vivian slipped from the fence, she reached out to stop her fall and grabbed the metal gutter, completing the electrical path as her feet landed on damp soil below. The current passed through her arm and across her chest to the ground. Witnesses later reported hearing a brief cry before her body stiffened, her hand clamping against the metal before she collapsed beside the shed wall. A neighbor watering plants in the adjacent yard heard the noise and looked over the fence. Vivian was lying motionless near the shed with one arm still touching the downspout. The neighbor called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within several minutes. Firefighters shut off power at the exterior breaker panel before approaching her. She was unresponsive and not breathing. Resuscitation attempts began immediately and continued while she was transported to a nearby hospital. Despite prolonged efforts, Vivian never regained a heartbeat and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled the death an electrocution after electrical current passed through her chest and disrupted the heart's rhythm. Investigators later confirmed the shed's power line had been knocked loose earlier that day and had rested against the metal gutter, energizing it. It was June 3, 2016, in a suburban neighborhood outside Sacramento. Quiet street, fenced yards, nothing unusual at a glance. Single-story homes, dry lawns, and low trees lining the fences, close enough that it's easy to notice what your neighbors are doing without really trying. Sheila Durney was 49 and worked from home doing freelance bookkeeping, so she was around most of the day. Over time, she got used to treating the space around her like it was partly hers, even when it wasn't. If something crossed into her side, even a little, she acted like she had a say in it. She didn't ask, didn't check, and didn't like being corrected. When neighbors pushed back, she brushed it off or argued it down. She had a habit of minimizing things, turning someone else's concern into something small or exaggerated. In her mind, she wasn't crossing a line. She was just being practical. If it looked fine, then it was fine. The tree next door had branches that stretched over the fence just enough for the fruit to hang within reach. That was enough for her. She started picking from it regularly, not once in a while, but often enough that it became routine. Step outside, grab one, sometimes two, move on. She didn't think of it as taking something that wasn't hers. To her, it was just there. Accessible meant acceptable. Earlier that season, the neighbor had treated the tree with a systemic pesticide, one that's absorbed into the plant and carried into the fruit as it grows. It wasn't something you could rinse off. He had told her clearly not to eat anything from the tree, more than once. Simple, direct, nothing unclear about it. She didn't just ignore that. She decided it didn't apply. To her, it didn't make sense. The fruit looked normal, smelled normal, tasted normal. No residue, no strange texture, nothing that matched what she expected treated to look like. She assumed he was exaggerating or just trying to keep her from taking it. That assumption stuck, and she didn't revisit it. If anything, she leaned into it, kept picking the fruit, kept eating it, like the warning didn't matter. It became automatic, part of her day without much thought. The symptoms started gradually. At first, it was mild: nausea, a headache, general feeling of being off. The kind of thing you might write off as something you ate or just a bad day. She didn't stop. She didn't reconsider what she'd been eating. She just moved past it, but the exposure continued. Over the next few days, the symptoms became more noticeable. The nausea lingered. The dizziness showed up more often. There were moments where she had to steady herself, where her balance slipped just enough to notice. Her energy dropped, and normal tasks started taking more effort. And still, no change. Even as it got worse, she didn't adjust her behavior. Either she didn't connect it to the fruit, or she dismissed the idea entirely. She had already decided it was safe, and that decision didn't shift just because her condition did. She kept eating it. What she didn't realize was how the exposure worked. The pesticide involved was a restricted-use organophosphate, the kind that requires a licensed applicator and carries clear warnings about fruit consumption windows that can run weeks or even months. It wasn't something that caused an immediate reaction, but it built up in the body over time. Small amounts, repeatedly consumed, could accumulate to dangerous levels. By the time the symptoms became severe, that buildup had already reached a point her body couldn't recover from. She was later found unresponsive inside her home. When everything was reviewed, there were no signs of anything sudden or external. What stood out was the pattern. Fruit collected from the neighboring tree, partially eaten over several days. The timing of her symptoms matched that pattern. The treatment of the tree had been documented earlier that season, and the type of pesticide used was consistent with one that remains within plant tissue. The cause of death was determined to be pesticide toxicity from repeated ingestion. The neighbor was investigated but not charged. Authorities found no grounds to pursue it. The pesticide had been applied legally by a licensed contractor and was properly logged. The warning he had given her was corroborated by 2 neighbors who had been present during at least one of those conversations. There was no evidence he had encouraged her to take the fruit or had any reason to believe she was still doing so after the warning. The tree remained on his property. The case was formally closed as an accidental death. It was June 14, 2017, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A quiet residential neighborhood was settling into the evening as many families attended school activities away from home. One property sat empty, leaving behind an object that had been the source of complaints for years. For 51-year-old Vera Cade, that object was a large trampoline. Vera worked in an administrative role and had developed a reputation among neighbors for being highly sensitive to noise and disturbances. When Vera felt someone was being inconsiderate, she rarely let the issue go. A nearby family owned a trampoline that was regularly used by neighborhood children after school and on weekends. The activity bothered Vera. She believed the trampoline was disruptive and should not be in the neighborhood at all. Over the years, she filed complaints with local authorities and repeatedly demanded that the homeowners remove it. Nothing happened. Officials found no violations, and the family had no intention of getting rid of it. As time passed, Vera became increasingly frustrated. What began as a complaint gradually turned into a personal mission. She became convinced that if nobody else was willing to solve the problem, she would have to do it herself. When June 14th arrived, Vera saw an opportunity. The homeowners had left for a school event, leaving the backyard unattended. Security footage later showed Vera entering the fenced yard, carrying a box cutter. Her plan was simple. If she damaged the trampoline badly enough, the family would have no choice but to throw it away. Most neighborhood disputes eventually fade with time. What makes this story different is that Vera wasn't looking for a compromise anymore. She wanted the problem gone. The trampoline was an older model with signs of wear from years of outdoor use. Vera climbed onto the frame and began cutting the jumping surface. The first cuts were small. Then they became larger. As more material was removed, the remaining sections absorbed increasing amounts of tension from the springs pulling against the frame. She continued cutting. What Vera likely didn't realize was that every new cut concentrated more force into the parts that remained intact. The trampoline was no longer carrying that force evenly, placing increasing strain on a smaller number of attachment points. I think a lot of people underestimate how much force ordinary household equipment can store. Most of the time, we never notice because everything works as designed. Eventually, Vera leaned over the frame and sliced through another section near the outer edge. That was when the failure occurred. A large section of the damaged mat suddenly tore apart. As the tension released, several worn attachment points failed in rapid succession. Nearby residents later reported hearing a loud snapping sound from the yard. One spring and hook assembly broke free from the frame and recoiled toward Vera. Because she was leaning directly over the trampoline, she had almost no time to react. The metal hardware struck the front of her throat with tremendous force. The impact knocked her backward and caused catastrophic injuries to her neck and airway. She collapsed beside the trampoline and struggled to breathe. The damage made it increasingly difficult for her to get enough air as the minutes passed. With nobody else in the backyard, there was no immediate assistance available. The snapping noise eventually drew the attention of nearby residents who contacted emergency services. Responders found Vera beside the damaged trampoline and transported her to a nearby hospital. Despite treatment efforts, she died from her injuries. Investigators later reviewed security footage documenting Vera entering the property and vandalizing the trampoline before the accident occurred. The medical examiner determined that her death resulted from traumatic injuries to the neck and airway caused by recoiling trampoline hardware. The part that stays with me is that Vera spent years viewing the trampoline as a threat. In the end, the only serious injury connected to it happened because she chose to destroy it herself. Her death was officially ruled accidental, caused by blunt force trauma from a detached trampoline spring assembly during the act of vandalizing the equipment. It was a damp Friday afternoon in Seattle, October 12th, 2018. Capitol Hill is full of people doing exactly what the neighborhood is known for, lining up outside coffee shops, drifting between boutiques, and stepping around people taking photos and filming little street videos for social media in the middle of the sidewalk and curb lane. Just beyond the bakery entrance was Taryn Vale, 29 years old, a local lifestyle influencer who built a nice little brand reviewing cafes and unboxing skincare. To her followers, she's the ultimate relatable cool girl. But off camera, let's just say Taryn had a major reputation for taking life's minor inconveniences incredibly personally. On this particular afternoon, she was already running late, stressed out, and carrying a heavy leather tote bag packed to the brim. Just a few feet away, we have another local creator, Maya Ferris. Maya is just doing what influencers do, filming a quick street-style video outside a bakery. It's the kind of content we see every single day on our feeds. She's panning her phone on a stabilizer, holding a pastry totally in her zone. Then, Taryn walks right through the background of the shot. Now, most of us would just keep walking, maybe roll our eyes. Taryn? She stops dead in her tracks, turns around, and completely loses it. She demands to know why Maya is filming her. Maya tries to play it cool, lowers the phone, and even offers to delete the clip, but Taryn isn't having it. Witnesses later said she seemed less mad about the camera and more triggered by the idea that people might be laughing at her between takes. Within seconds, the heated argument spills right onto the busy corner. Maya's backing up, desperately trying to de-escalate. Taryn keeps advancing, screaming that these content creators think they own the neighborhood and can point cameras wherever they want. Then, things get violent. Taryn swings that heavy leather tote bag like a weapon. The first hit catches Maya right in the face. The second strike smashes into the phone stabilizer, sending the device crashing to the wet concrete. But guess what? The phone keeps recording from the ground. As Maya's friend yells for help, two heroic bystanders jump in to separate them. One grabs Taryn's arm, and the other pushes her back to create space. But Taryn is completely blinded by fury. She's fighting them off, trying to lunge around them to get back at Maya, totally oblivious to where her feet actually are. Her right heel catches the sloped, wet edge of a painted bike lane. She slips. Instantly, Taryn pitches backward off the curb, right into the street. And this is where the timing becomes absolutely heartbreaking. At that exact microsecond, a box delivery truck is crawling through the intersection on a green light. The driver is being careful, but Taryn drops into his blind spot so fast, she's just a flash of movement. She hits the asphalt hard, and before she can even roll away, the truck's front tire rolls directly over her lower body. The screaming just stops. Emergency crews rushed her straight to a medical center, but the devastating internal crush injuries were just too severe. She was tragically pronounced dead shortly after arrival. When the police checked the footage from storefronts, traffic cams, and ironically, Maya's phone still rolling on the ground, the story was undeniable. No one pushed her. It was a freak, tragic accident born entirely out of a sudden burst of rage. It's a heavy reminder for all of us. Keep your cool out there, guys. Absolutely nothing on social media is ever worth losing your life over. Stay safe. It was April 19th, 2018, in downtown Sacramento, and it was a warm, bright afternoon at Cesar Chavez Plaza. The park was filled with the usual lunchtime crowd, office workers eating outside, buses rushing by, and retirees playing chess under the trees. It felt completely normal, but the heat and the crowds had everyone a little impatient. The guy causing the trouble was 52-year-old Hector Ruiz. He used to do maintenance work, but after getting laid off, evicted, and falling into heavy drinking, he basically started living out of public parks. Hector's neighbors said that he'd pick fights with strangers over benches, blast music, and get right in people's faces until they backed down. He was just a bully looking for a reaction. That afternoon, 74-year-old Wei Chen was sitting quietly under the trees, setting up a concrete chess table. Wei had moved to California in the 80s and spent decades teaching judo to kids. He had bad arthritis and moved slowly, but his former students always said he was the most patient, gentle guy. Hector walked into the plaza already in a bad mood after getting into an argument with a bus driver earlier on. He saw Wei at the chess table and started yelling that he was taking up too much space. Wei didn't want any trouble. He just nodded, packed up his chess pieces into a bag, and prepared to leave. But Hector wouldn't let it go. He leaned over the table and aggressively swept the remaining chess pieces across the concrete. Plastic pieces scattered under benches and rolled toward the sidewalk, while several bystanders immediately yelled at him to stop. But Wei still didn't fight back. He crouched slowly because of his arthritis, picked up only a few pieces near his shoes, then started walking away toward the sidewalk, carrying the partially open bag against his chest. But that actually triggered Hector and followed him, screaming about respect in public space while getting closer with every step. Witnesses later said Wei kept trying to angle his body away and continue walking, but Hector repeatedly moved into his path instead of letting him leave. Then, Hector suddenly reached out from behind, grabbed the front collar of Wei's lightweight jacket, and yanked him backwards so violently that the stitching near the shoulder ripped apart with a loud, tearing sound. Wei nearly lost his footing as the pull jerked him sideways toward the tables again. And that's when Wei's decades of martial arts training just automatically kicked in. He didn't punch or kick Hector. He simply reacted the way his body had been conditioned for years to react under pressure. According to the police report, Wei turned his hips slightly while trapping Hector's grabbing arm against his body to break the grip and create separation. The movement itself was quick and compact, barely looking forceful at all. But Hector had already lunged forward so aggressively that the sudden redirection of his own momentum sent him stumbling sideways toward the concrete seating area. His feet crossed awkwardly as he tried regaining balance. One hand reached toward the bench instinctively, but his shoulder clipped the edge first, throwing his upper body sideways. The side of his head then struck the concrete support beneath the table with a heavy impact that several nearby witnesses later said they clearly heard across the plaza. Hector immediately dropped onto the pavement, motionless. For a few seconds, several bystanders thought he had simply been knocked out from the fall. Then blood started running from his left ear onto the concrete while his breathing turned uneven and wet-sounding. Wei reportedly backed away several feet, still holding the torn section of his jacket while staring at Hector on the ground. Someone called 911 right away, and paramedics got him to the trauma center within 6 minutes. But the damage to his skull and brain was too severe from hitting the concrete edge. Hector passed away that evening without ever waking up. When the police watched the phone videos recorded by bystanders, it was an open and shut case. Hector was the one who attacked, and Wei was purely defending himself. The state didn't file any charges against Wei, though, sadly, his friends said he was so shaken up he stopped coming to the park altogether. It's just incredibly sad. A man lost his life, and an innocent elderly man was traumatized, all because someone wanted to start a fight over a chess table that nobody else was even using.